What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Take What Resonates. Okay, this is episode 4. If you guys haven't seen episode 1 to 3, please go and check those out. Those are beautiful topics we were talking about. We got Edgardo and I back again. We're keeping it discussion style. You could say it's podcast style. But this week's topic is about pouring into ourselves. So, without any further ado, let's get started.
All right.
Yeah.
So the first question that I want to ask you is, what does it mean to pour into yourself? For a beginner that doesn't even know what pouring into yourself means, please explain.
Pouring into self. Some people would just take it as like self-care, but I would say pouring into yourself, it's more than self-care, because unless I don't want to get too technical, tell me if they seem similar in the comments. But pouring into yourself to me is like a mixture of doing the inner work, going on this healing journey, because you're on this journey to becoming a better version. That's a piece of pouring into yourself. Pouring into yourself is having boundaries. Pouring into yourself is having me time. What does me time look like? Investing in new skills, hobbies, experiencing. I feel like that's what pouring into yourself means to me.
Yeah.
A mixture of spiritual practice, as in doing the inner work, and a mixture of self-care.
Yes. Self-care is usually what people associate with pouring into oneself, because self-care can be thought of as like a nice bubble bath, a nice bubble bath with nice music, bath salts. Like, you can relax, you can be in a nice healing space. But if you didn't meditate that day, like, are you even really pouring into yourself? You know what I mean? Like, they both go hand in hand, and I think in my opinion, maybe, but it's a little more than just relaxation. It's what you were saying, like experiencing new things, learning new things, because you feel like your cup is full at the end of it. Versus, we'll talk a little later about what usually takes us away from pouring into ourselves.
Okay. Which brings me into the next question. Why is it important for one to pour into yourself, for us to pour into ourselves? Why is it so important?
Okay, so I guess I'll start. Why is it important? Well, I don't think you can expect to pour into another person as efficiently or do the things that you need to do in the day, including other people, right? As well, especially if you're not an extroverted person, it's even harder.
Oh, yeah.
So pouring into yourself is so important, especially if you pour into people on the daily. So I think that's one of the most important things to do.
Agreed.
If you're dealing with people.
Yeah, agreed. Like, if you're in the service industry or anything, if you're doing spiritual work, like with other people, you have to pour into yourself. And I agree with that. It's like, how can you, like that when he brought up the basket term, the empty basket term, how can you, like...
Empty glass.
Empty glass. Oh, well, I'm going to bring up the basket term. How can you pour from an empty basket? I know a lot of you guys have heard that term before. Like, how can you show up in the world when your battery is on E, So that, like, it's very important to pouring into yourself, because it's like, I can give a personal example with school. I've been learning so much. I'm in coaching. I'm in a coaching course, and you can't show up as a coach if you haven't poured into yourself. And my classes are like very heavy classes, because it's like basically every class is like a coaching session, right? And that's a lot of energy being like Sorry, I'm like looking at the camera. That's a lot of energy being taken from me. So it's like if I there's days where I have a morning routine, but I notice there's days when I don't do my morning routine. I show up in class like 50%. I'm not listening. I like zone out. Or I'm just like frustrated. So many people are sharing their experiences and I just feel drained and depleted. So for me, that's why it's important to why pouring into yourself is very important.
All right. That's good.
Next question is give examples of times you haven't poured into yourself. I feel like I
Yeah,
did.
you
I gave my
definitely.
example. Can you give your example of when you haven't poured into yourself and what did that look like?
So I think if you're responsible for people, which I know a lot of you can't relate, but a lot of you can relate. And if you're responsible for people, you have to pour into yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult to be in a situation where you don't pour into yourself, but you have to pour into other people because it's your responsibility. So I think that kind of shows, like, not to put myself on blast or anything, but when I'm in a position where I don't pour into myself and I don't do my morning routine, as Shireen said,
Mm-hmm.
my pouring into people can have can seem like I have other intentions behind it when really it is love. But it becomes harder
It becomes harder
because it's
to.
harder to pour into somebody else's glass when your glass is halfway full or near empty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can Another example I can give is just like the times where I just like haven't poured into myself and like a family member will call and or a friend. Oh yes, a recent example. A friend just started venting to me and I didn't pour into myself, but I was still kind of offering a space to listen. But what ended up happening is I just left that person on red, and I told them like I'll have to come back to you, and I forgot about them because I just didn't have the time to receive all that energy from that person, and they were coming in with a lot of information, a lot of energy because they needed a listening ear, and I felt bad because I couldn't be that proper listening ear. I was kind of like half-ass listening, and ended up at this point I still didn't even end up having a conversation with them because we're busy. So it's like that's why it's yeah, again, that's why it's important. And yeah, next question is, can you give our viewers like examples of pouring into themselves, practical ways of doing it?
Yeah. So there are things that people do that allegedly is a form of pouring into yourself,
Mm-hmm.
but not as effective. So the things that I can say, that I can give, are very effective ways of pouring into oneself.
Yeah.
And first, I believe, morning routine is essential when it comes to pouring into oneself, because the first moments of the day should be with yourself, when you're allowed to be present in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
just there. And either you meditate, either you do some heavy breathing or some light breathing, either you read, just anything that is considered a form of meditation,
Mm-hmm.
which is a form of being in the present moment, exercising that willpower, is pouring into yourself.
Oh yeah.
So that is definitely something I would keep as a mandatory, daily practice. And can you add? Because that's all I have
uh
right now.
Practical ways of pouring into yourself, staying healthy, keeping up with your health and wellness. You want to get into a nice active routine. It doesn't just always have to be the gym. It can be, I do Pilates in the morning, little follow along Pilates on YouTube. you can pour into yourself by eating really good meals. You can pour into yourself by the stuff you consume too. You can I feel like pouring into yourself too, just to add to the first question, is also a form of self-love as well.
Yes.
And you can pour into yourself by just having just taking in good energy things like shows, food, music. Like, you can pour into yourself with those ways. You can pour into yourself by doing the things you love doing as well. If you like dancing, have a dance time, have like a scheduled time where you're going to dance and release some built up energy. We can go on and on. If you guys are so curious about other ways you could pour into yourself, just leave a comment. We can even give you more.
Yeah, join a Pilates class. I like how you mentioned exercise, because I was just mentioning a few like spiritual slash things that could benefit you emotionally. But it's definitely, there's different aspects as physical, emotional, spiritual, and intellectual. You know, you could put them all together. They all work in symphony, but pouring into yourself in all those aspects is really the goal. Because if you're in balance and you're doing the best, operating at the highest level in all those, then you really can't be nothing is going to affect you. Like, nothing is going to even get you out of that zone. You know, the zone. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, pour into your mind, body, and spirit as well. That's pouring into yourself. Which brings us to the next question of how does setting boundaries play a role to pouring into oneself?
I think I scratched the surface of this. If you are responsible for other people, then you have to just be very aware of what's coming out and what's going in.
Oh
Do you
yeah.
have anything to add to that?
Getting back to the example with the friend, if I had put up the boundary, because I can admit the boundary wasn't there. Like, it got set halfway, but if I had put up the boundary, like, make sure you check in with me before and see if I'm willing to host a space for you to like dump on me, then yes, like, so it's setting up boundaries like plays a role with pouring into self, because it's like it's your energy, right? It's like getting into your energy, and how much of yourself you're giving out to people. So
Yeah.
when you are setting up boundaries, that's you controlling how much of you're putting out there.
Yeah.
And that falls into pouring into self.
Yes. So if we could make a metaphor to this whole situation, having things withdrawn from you, having things deposited, let's put it in a bank account terms, right? If you are an account, you're, let's say, Shireen's checking account for Ed, and I do nice things for her. I pour into her, and that means I'm making deposits. So she probably feels really good about everything that I'm doing. She probably feels like she could pour into me. But there comes a point where my bank account has had too many withdrawals, and I can't pour into anyone anymore. I need someone to pour into me, or I need to pour into myself. And usually there's nothing that can replace me pouring into myself, because that's a whole separate bank account type transaction. So you got to be mindful on what's going out, what's coming out, and what's going in. Just like a bank account.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, you don't want to be an overdraft, emotional overdraft with someone.
Setting up boundaries helps you see who's taking out, who's withdrawn a lot versus depositing. I agree with that. And that brings me, okay, so the next question is like, what are some challenges people tend to face when it comes to setting up boundaries?
Maybe you can speak on this.
Um, Setting them.
Setting them is the challenge.
Setting them is the challenge, and then sticking with them, because like I do have the boundary. Like my siblings set that up with me, and I set that up with them. Like check in before you dump in. Sometimes I forget. Sometimes I just get into dumping. So it's like maintaining that boundary as well. I would say is the biggest challenge because you can set it. You can set it, which is a challenge too, but it's just getting out of that comfort zone where you didn't have any boundaries and keeping it maintained, keeping it up.
Good. Yeah. I think that pretty much answers that. Yeah, don't be shy. Don't be shy in setting up boundaries. It's your energy going out at the end of the day. And if you're making deposits in other people's accounts, you're doing things for other people, pouring into others, then always have the intention of loving them. Don't do it for any other intention, because then it will seem like a chore. Will you want to do it? Who knows? You might not want to do it.
Oh yeah. Move it. Boundaries. Set boundaries with love, but also self-love. And then how can we communicate our boundaries? How can we practice communicating those
Yeah.
to people? What are ways?
Yeah, this is... So maybe you gotta make a list. Sometimes you can't freestyle everything, but maybe you gotta make a list. You gotta be in the state of love, and then set the boundaries with the person for when they're ready to hear it. Because nothing can survive without love, man.
Oh yeah.
You gotta have a plan. You gotta have a plan B. If a person isn't willing to respect those boundaries, and you clearly set them with them, then maybe it's time to move on. Maybe it's time to stop pouring into that person. Maybe what you were lacking all along was you pouring into yourself.
Ding ding ding. Yeah, what he said, like when you're trying to communicate your boundaries, you want to come from a place of like compassion and love and patience. You want to come in, you want to make sure you're coming in a high vibration too. Like, you don't want to be communicating your boundaries while you're moving out of frustration, or like out of disrespect or aggressive anger, because I guarantee you that person's not gonna hear the boundaries. But there's a difference between like communicating your boundaries versus like when a boundary is being crossed. And I feel like I didn't have this question on the list, but for those that of you that are viewing that don't know what your boundaries are, like reflect on times where you had like aggressive emotional outburst. And what I love about the emotion anger, it shows you when your boundary is being crossed. So anytime you caught yourself being angry with someone and you're screaming and yelling at them and you're like, whoa, where did that come from? Chances are they overstepped a boundary that you have not yet discovered in yourself. And you should reflect on that, and that's how you can come up with what boundaries you have. Because to be fair, a lot of us, like when I started off in most of my relationships, I had to learn my boundaries through relationships. So, yeah, at the start, we're not going to know what our boundaries are. But once you do, it's also now communicating them from a place of like love and compassion, unconditional love and compassion, and yeah, and understanding.
Nice. I like that. All right, we're about wrapping up here.
No, we're
So
not.
we got a few more questions. Comment down below if this is helpful. Give this video a like, and we will continue on with this series. Thank you for watching.
How does pouring into self contribute to our spiritual and our spiritual growth and transformation?
Like I mentioned before, Shireen pouring into me is not the same as me pouring into me. So there are some things that I can only do, and I can only really effectively transform and change as a person if I'm accepting that change. So it's very important for you to pour into yourself. You can have all the people, you can have your 7 wives pouring into you. Not just kidding. You can have all the people around you pouring into you, but if you don't pour into yourself, it's going to be very difficult to change. That's the truth.
Agreed. It's pouring into self is very transformational, transformational, and
Transformative.
and a push for growth, because it takes a lot for you to get up one day and realize, oh my God, I have to tend to myself, because the way how we were like brought up in the system in this Western part of the world is not to tend to self. We were brought up to pay bills and work and then have a somewhat social life. But because it's not a fulfilling life when you're living in that rhythm, you don't, rather, for some people, instead of them pouring into themselves, it's more so escaping from the day-to-day life, that the day-to-day life that they're living, because it's unfulfilling. So once you wake up and realize that it's important to start pouring into yourself spiritually, mentally, and physically, you'll realize like it's very healing. It's very healing. Again, like just summarizing all the all the questions we answered, it's pouring into yourself is setting up boundaries. Pouring into yourself is being healthy. Pouring into yourself is self-love. So you'll be surprised how many people are not doing that, and once they start, that is very transformative. That is that's personal growth right there.
Yeah. Would you say that pouring into yourself is done a lot in private or in public? Because some people are extroverted and some people actually don't feel like going out and socializing is something that's taken away from them, but mostly actually giving. It's giving something back to them. Some people feel like freedom from that,
It just depends, I guess, because pouring into yourself can also be surrounding yourself with good people that pour into you.
Yeah, 100%.
So
yeah.
it just depends. I agree that some of it is in personal. Most pouring into yourself is personal, because it's like taking some time out of the day for you, because we're so used to being for them, So yeah, for sure, I would say majority of it's personal, but some of it's also external. And
if I could add to that, so some of it is external, some of it is social, but in that case, I would say it's more about the quality of people that you're around and not the quantity of people that you're around. If you're around good quality people that raise your vibration, then yeah, you could be in that space. They could host that space for you where you can be in a pouring into yourself mood.
Mm-hmm.
But majority of it is alone, in private.
Mm-hmm. Because it's like sitting with your emotions. It's you know, nurturing yourself in times where people can't, because sometimes people can't always pour into you. That's why it's pouring into self. And yeah, like exactly what Garo was saying. And I feel like we already answered the last question, because it's just asking how does it play a role with personal development. So did you have any other things you wanted to add to this topic before we wrap it up here?
Maybe some final words of motivation.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, things are the best that they could ever be for us to have the capacity to pour into ourselves.
Yes.
You know, there's actually a lot of individualism going around where people are all about themselves, but they stop there. You know, they stop there and they are in a state where they're done with people.
Mm-hmm.
And that shows that they're not pouring into themselves like they should, because they can't even open themselves up again
Mm-hmm.
to the public, you know? So keep that in mind and pour into yourself. You know, there's all the things that you have are there. All the tools are there.
Yeah, we have access to we're in the age of information now. We're going into it. Like we
We've been in it.
we've been in it.
Yeah.
Like we have access to a lot of there's just no excuse why we shouldn't be pouring into ourselves and doing the inner work and overcoming challenges like how our parents didn't do, or the past generations did. We have access to so many we have an abundance of information and people that are willing to help you.
Yeah. And tools.
And tools.
Yeah.
So that wraps things up. Beautiful topic.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Just
Edgardo.
remember, you know, you're not young forever, so pour into yourself, because you might be an old, wrinkly bag, and, you know, if you didn't do the inner work, then you got nothing on the outside, nothing on the inside.
Just tell them.
So,
just look at your
shine
parents.
like you're supposed to.
Yeah.
So, with this message, we conclude this episode. Take what resonates.
Thank you guys so much if you made it to the end. We love and appreciate you guys. And peace.
And love.